First thing on our agenda is the attendance. Please record your name and affiliation in the chat box. Thank you so much. While we're doing that, we'll move on to item two, the January 28th meeting summary. I hope you all had a chance to review the meeting minutes. Are there any objections? All right, seeing and hearing none, we will go on to item three, which is our public comment period. Do we have any comments from the public?
We do not.
Thank you, Sid. Moving right along, we will be going to item four, the LRTP progress update. So this is just a reminder of our process flow for the LRTP. The process starts with the socioeconomic data development of the base year 2050. This was a 2-year process that was adopted by our policy board in September of 2023. The second phase of this process is the scenario analysis, in which we look at multiple scenarios based on a myriad of assumptions, population growth trends, and spatial distribution of the population and job growth. This is known as our Pathways to Future and was adopted by the RRTPO Policy Board last September. We then developed the regional strategic direction, which includes the vision, guiding principles, goals, objectives, and strategies for the plan. We then conducted a transportation needs assessment, which identifies current and future transportation needs and alternative solutions. Within this process, we look at areas of safety, congestion, accessibility, infrastructure, and among other transportation issues. We then developed the universe of projects, which was a 2-month-long process that started almost immediately after the approval of the issues inventory by the policy board in October. Once we had the universe of projects finalized, we prioritized these projects based on their effectiveness in addressing regional goals and objectives. We then evaluate the plan, and then finally the plan comes for adoption by the RTPO Policy Board, scheduled for September of 2026. So we are now at a critical juncture in our planning process. As we develop our project prioritization and implementation process, we're simultaneously developing the constraint plan. The prioritization process is a rigorous data-driven exercise. We evaluate each individual project against 12 performance measures. We take the initial project description and translate them into precise inputs that are then coded within the regional transportation model. These inputs may include a number of lanes added for highway capacity projects, transit frequency, and safety countermeasures such as median installations and active transportation accommodations. These projects are coded into the network, and then the model provides us with data outputs. This provides us with the delta for a specific performance measure between the build and no build scenario. From here, we can address questions like, does this project actually reduce regional delay? Does it shift travelers into transit? Does it improve air quality by reducing idling? This allows us to see exactly how much performance we're getting from each project. Ultimately, this ensures that the projects moving into the constraint plan are those that provide the highest return on investment. From here, we score the projects based on their performance and then prioritize them within the constraint plan. We start with a long-range forecast for all anticipated federal, state, and local revenues over the next 20 years, which acts as a hard limit for our spending capabilities. The task now is to fit the highest performing projects into these revenue buckets. Because we have these 12 performance measures, we pick the combination of projects that yield the highest cumulative benefit for the region within our fiscal means. So that was a brief overview of the LRTP process and where we are today. Are there any questions or concerns? Seeing and hearing none, we will move right along to our project prioritization methodology. So here we'll just have a brief couple of slides that'll show what changes were made to our methodology. For air pollution emission section, we added CO2 emissions, recognizing that CO2 is a primary driver of climate change, and we want to monitor this occurrence with respect to project effectiveness. We've also added particulate matter 2.5. The reason being that the EPA strengthened the annual national ambient air quality standard for fine particle pollution. In 2024, the EPA lowered the annual safety threshold for PM 2.5 from 12 milligrams per cubic meter down to 9 milligrams per cubic meter. So this has provided us with a more stringent threshold for where we can measure the PM2 particulates. We've also we've also given serious and fatal injury crashes the same monetary value in our weighting. The reason being that the difference between serious and fatal injury crashes is chance, and many times it may be due to factors not transportation related. Additionally, we target a reduction in both serious and fatal injury crashes for Vision Zero, so we want to have that consistency in our scoring methodology as well. Also, to reflect the importance of safety, we bumped up our safety performance measure weight from 20% to 25%. We've also changed the project tiering to better reflect how projects impact surrounding environments. For instance, previously, where all capacity change projects were given a Tier 3 designation, we focus more on immediate impacts where road widenings within a capacity change project type is given a Tier 3 designation. And a lane removal or bus lane that already exists, that already operates within the existing right-of-way is given a lower tier. We've also wanted to flesh out more our crosswalk between our regional goals and objectives and the smart scale baseline. So for instance, the LRTP goal weights for project scoring were derived to mirror smart scale performance measures while reflecting updated regional goals. While the smart scale framework provides a robust data-driven foundation for performance measurement, it is designed for a broad statewide context. To ensure investments truly have regional impact, our TPO has strategically adopted these weights to align with our specific regionally defined vision, goals, and objectives. This ensures that a project's success is measured against our community's definition of progress and not just a universal standard. So a one-on-one match would ignore the unique social, economic, and geographic nuances of our region. So we want to flesh this out a little bit more in our explanation as we crosswalk smart scales project methodology, scoring methodology with the RTPO scoring methodology. Any questions so far? Yes, Mitch.
Yeah, I think I missed it. Could you? I think it's one or two slides. You said an example about a bus lane being weighted differently and different right of way.
So that goes into the the project tiering. Again, we wanted to best emphasize how a project impacts the immediate environment. So if we're already designated a lane, if we take a lane and designate it as a bus lane, that doesn't necessarily have the same impact as a road widening. So we wanted to reflect that in the project tiering.
Gotcha. Thank you.
If I can just clarify for everyone. So if you weren't on the 2045 iteration, what we did last time was on any capacity change that was on an arterial, we considered it a tier 3 and assumed it had the biggest impacts. But capacity changes can also be reducing the roadway capacity and shifting lanes to a bus capacity, for example, or an HOV lane. And so we wanted to put that nuance in, which mirrors, I think, some of the changes that Smart Scale's made over recent rounds as well.
Thanks, Miles. Just checking to see if we have any further questions here. Seeing none, we can go right along to our constrained plan development. And I'll pass that off to Miles.
This is reintroducing everyone to fiscal constraint and the constrained plan development process that we've been going through. This is all teeing up to the release of the draft scenarios that we've been talking about. So we would just want to provide this background for the group, as we'll be providing that information this week and then setting up meetings to talk with our project champions about the potential scenarios and where we're headed with this process. But the starting point is the LRTP, as Dorian mentioned earlier, has to be fiscally constrained, which essentially means what can we afford to do with the revenues that we're expecting. So the two key components of that is that we have to be able to forecast what revenues are going to be reasonably available over the life cycle of the plan. The other component of the federal requirements is that we have to also demonstrate that we're adequately operating and maintaining our existing system first. So those are the two key requirements. Obviously, this requires us to coordinate with VDOT, DRPT, GRTC to develop the forecast and make sure that we are providing for the system as needed. Next slide. So I think we've showed this before, but the 2050 plan, we have locked down our numbers, and the total revenue that we're looking at between now and 2050 is $31.5 billion. So that's 2026 out to 2050. VDOT and DRPT have provided the bulk of the revenue forecasts. Some of that was also Plan RVA staff, so our team, projecting out kind of straight line with some numbers where we only had it through a shorter time window. And then also coordinating with GRTC to review their planning documents and understand where their planning assumptions are for future revenues and also for future expenses. The other thing that I did want to highlight in here is that there is a small split of CVTA revenue with the Tri-Cities MPO. So that is reflective of the southern portion of Chesterfield that is not within the Richmond region. And that mirrors the approach that's taken for STBG, CMAC, other federal funds that are split between the two MPOs. So, Dorian, if you can move forward. So this is the transit revenue forecast. Basically, what it's showing is there are four main federal programs that we're looking at. So these are through the Federal Transit Administration. So 5303 is transit planning. 5307 is the kind of most general all-purpose transit funding program. 5310 is specialized transit for people who are elderly or with disabilities. And 5339 is really for buses and bus facilities. And then we have state revenues in here, which include a straight line forecast from DRPT for operating and capital assistance, as well as the TRIP program, as well as the state matches that are provided for some of the federal funds. And then finally, we have the CVTA share of revenue that goes to GRTC, operating revenues and contributions that would come from GRTC's own operations. So those are locality contributions, those are ad revenues, those are investments that GRTC has coming back into the pot, and then local matches that are coming for some of those other programs as well. So in total, we're looking at 4.8 billion in dedicated transit revenues across the life cycle of the plan. And moving forward, we have a similar table for highway revenues. This is a much bigger pot, to almost 26.7 billion, but it includes everything from administrative and maintenance programs through Smart Scale, which is the major competitive funding program, as well as the smaller funding programs, which are administered through the MPO, like the Transportation Alternatives Program, the Surface Transportation Block Grant, and the Congestion Mitigation Air Quality programs. We also reflect the CVTA regional and CVTA local revenues in here as well. And so this Sankey diagram is really a high level summary of sort of where the money flows and what we're talking about when we talk about the constraint plan. So of the almost $31.5 billion, 57% of that goes to what we consider programmatic investments. So those are investments in highway maintenance and state of good repair, highway administration, highway safety programs, which is really primarily systemic safety improvements across the whole system, and then transit operations and maintenance. So that is the bulk of the budget just taken off the top to operate and maintain the system that we have today. And then the second step that we go through is to set aside money for local projects. So I think we've had a lot of discussions over the past year about the project inclusion guidelines, what's considered regional, what needs to be in the constrained long-range plan. So there are obviously projects that are happening that may even use some of these funding sources like CVTA revenues or smart scale monies that aren't at the level that are going to be included in this project list. And so we were making sure that there is funding set aside for those types of projects. And so that's what we consider our local bucket. So that includes set asides for transit capital improvements, like the essential transit infrastructure program that GRTC has, bus replacements, all of those projects that are really just ongoing capital improvements from the GRTC side, and then a pot of flexible local projects. This is basically reflecting a portion of the CVTA local money and the district grant program through Smart Scale, recognizing that there will be smaller intersection improvements, sidewalk improvements, projects that won't rise to the level of a regional scale plan. And then finally, we have the last bucket, which is the regional bucket. From that, we pull out funding for everything that's already been committed. So any project that we see in the 6-year program, in the transportation improvement program, or in the CVTA program that rises to that level of regional based on our inclusion guidelines, we make sure that the funding that has been allocated and the balance to complete those projects that's needed is set aside off the top. And then what's left is basically the planned budget, what we're looking at for the universe of projects as we're trying to prioritize and consider which projects to invest in and sort of include in the plan for the next 20 years. So that leaves us just under $8 billion for the planned budget. So that's about what we're looking at this time around, which is right in line with about where we were in the last plan, adjusted for the increased size of the overall budget. Next slide. So some of the key assumptions, and these are just important so that the work group understands them, and we're happy to take input and comment on these. But some of the major assumptions here is that we're essentially accepting the CTB and GRTC's maintenance and asset management formulas as sufficient to maintaining a state of good repair. So there are dedicated funds for maintenance that are in each of those budgets. We're accepting those numbers as meeting that state of good repair. The CVTA local and the district grant program, I mentioned this before, but we're assuming a 50-50 split between local and regional scale projects. This was based on a review of recent rounds of district grant eligible applications, as well as the CVTA local spending and sort of the projects that have been invested in over the life cycle of the plan. I think the other two big assumptions I wanted to cover for the local transit investments and the operating projections, we primarily were looking at GRTC's transit strategic plan. So this is GRTC's plan that lays out the next 10 years worth of investments, where money is going to be needed to maintain the existing assets, where there's money needed for expansion. And so we wanted to make sure that we were reflecting GRTC's own planning in those assumptions. And then finally, the committed projects, as I mentioned earlier, were taken from the 6-year program, the TIP, as well as the CVTA plans to try and make sure that we covered the whole range of sort of projects that have already been planned and committed to over this next 6-year window. And next slide, Dorian. So where do we go from here? As I mentioned, we have that 7.9, almost $8 billion that we're looking at. And so what we're trying to build toward is a plan that accounts for the cost of the projects, inflation into the future, and really trying to prioritize the projects that we can do now and which ones we need to build toward in the future. And so this, you've seen this table before, but basically we take the funded projects off the top. So there's about $1.6 billion there. And then we have 3 categories that we're really looking at, sort of our low cost or immediate interventions that aren't funded right now, but could be funded with whatever revenues we still are forecasting over this next immediate 6-year window. Then we have our building blocks, which are our midterm window, and then priority projects, which are kind of the last 12 years of the plan. And for those two, we're really looking at projects that are going to be a little bit more expensive, potentially ones that have multiple phases that we need to do phase 1 before we can do phase 2, or ones that haven't been studied yet. And so we're trying to make sure that we're reflecting adequate adjustments for inflation for each of those periods. Beyond the 3 constrained time periods, we also have a vision list. So the vision list is basically projects that we would like to do that we support, but there's not enough revenue in our plan. Or in the case of projects like rail projects, they're revenues that aren't within sort of the purview of MPO planning. So we don't actually have a good way to break down how much would be the MPO's fair share of rail revenues. And so those are projects that we keep in here and we recognize as desirable if we can find extra funding sources to make them possible. And so I think this is you've seen this before. This is just kind of reorganized in a little bit different way, but we've developed multiple different investment options for the work group and then also for the public to review before we make a final selection and recommendation to go up to the policy board. So the goal for this is to have a preferred selection developed really over the next month on these options. So we're giving you 4 different baselines to start with. 3 of them are based on efficiency, which is really the benefit divided by the cost. And so the idea is we're trying to get the most benefit that we can for our dollar. And those 3 alternatives, one's a baseline. There's no dedicated mode splits. It's just strictly benefit cost. One of them is a mode shift scenario. And that one really represents us basically increasing the budget for non-highway projects 50% more than what we see as sort of the usual investment pattern. And then selecting projects from that first, and then taking anything surplus and moving it back into the highway bucket before we select the highway projects. And then the third option is kind of our business as usual. It's based on the existing splits that we have in the 6-year program and where our investments are going today. And then the fourth scenario that we wanted to look at, and this is one that we've heard kind of thrown around over the years, is a transformative scenario where we're only looking at the benefit. We're not looking at the cost. And we're just trying to get the projects that have the biggest potential benefit for the region and see what it looks like if we develop those projects. And so those are the 4 scenarios that we're working on. And I think Dorian's going to talk a little bit more about the schedule on them later. Dorian, do I have the next slide too? Yeah. So I've got just a couple more from me, and then I'm happy to take questions before turning it back over to Dorian. But I just wanted to cover a few of these. So bridges and rail, and to a lesser extent, park and ride and transfer centers, and I just included those in the heading. But bridges are regionally significant. Bridges are included in that universe of projects. So we did call for any of those sorts of projects, which were really the ones that were major rehabilitation or replacement of a bridge that was already on our sort of regional highway network. But bridge funding is really a kind of a programmatic investment, the way that we view it. You know, the State of Good Repair program exists to rehabilitate those bridges. So we have historically, in the last plan, considered that as a programmatic investment and not put it through the scoring process. And it's not considered in that regional set of projects that we're looking at for the sort of the constrained portion that we're working on now. The other piece of that is the rail improvements. As I mentioned earlier, the rail revenues are not reflected in the plan. We don't have a forecast of sort of how much FRA spending there would be and how much Amtrak spending there would be within the footprint of the Richmond MPO. And since we're not able to get down to that level of detail, and since FRA doesn't require it to projects to be in the MPO's plan, those projects have historically just been included in the vision list. So projects that we'd like to do, their revenues and funding sources that we're not looking at as part of this plan. I did mention park and ride and transfer centers. Those have been scored, but we did want to just highlight them because there are some that we frankly, the scoring is more oriented towards travel modes and not facilities. So it's a little bit harder to score those. And so we just wanted to flag those as something to be aware of as you're looking at scorecards when they come out. And if we have questions, we're very happy to talk about them and talk about other ways to potentially look at those as well. Next slide, Dorian. And then the last thing I really wanted to cover is the private and local funded projects. So for our locality members, you're aware of these already, but there are some projects that come through the process which may actually add capacity. They may even build whole new, arterials, um, but they're not projects that are going to ask for federal money. They're not projects that are going to go through any of these funding programs that we're looking at. They're being built either by like the purely local tax dollars or through the EDA or by a private developer who's building out a broader subdivision. And so we want to make sure that those projects are reflected in the plan. They're not scored because they're not really part of our universe of projects, but they need to be reflected because we are trying to capture any of those regionally significant projects, however they're moving forward, particularly for air quality considerations when we start moving into the air quality planning component of this. So that is my really, really high level overview of the whole constraint plan development. I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has right now.
Great, Miles. Thanks. Any questions for Miles? All right, seeing none, just wanted to showcase a sample scorecard, which kind of serves as the impetus of the constrained long-range plan development. So this is a sample scorecard that shows each project performs across 12 performance measures. We have the goal weight, performance measure, and performance measure weight. Particular interest importance are the bottom three numbers, the benefit score. So what is the usefulness of each project in addressing each regional goal? The project cost, and then the project cost, and then the cost benefit score, which takes the benefit score and divides it by the project cost in tens of millions of dollars. These scores in particular are the basis of the investment package scenario development, in the order in which the projects will appear in each development package. So as you can see, we have the goals broken down by weight, PMs, the weights, and then the points that are given to each project by each performance measure. So we just want to run down what the next steps are from our perspective. We need to refine the data outputs. This is basically quality control of the data outputs. Again, this is a list of about 200 projects that need to be vetted individually. So this, tends to be a tedious process. We need to develop the investment scenarios and one pagers for the advisory work group and public consumption. We'll finalize and distribute project scorecards to the advisory work group. After this meeting, we'll be beginning scheduling one-on-one meetings with the localities to discuss preferences on investment packages and how to best align these projects within the constrained plan. These meetings will be held between as soon as possible to the end of the month. Um, we then will refine the scenario packages based on your feedback and then present the preferred packages to the policy board in April. Any questions? All right, seeing none, for the next meeting, we want the meeting to be in person because we feel that would be the best way to negotiate which project should be included within the constrained plan. So we're looking to have either the first or second Wednesday of April once we look at boardroom availability. But we will come up with that date as soon as possible and then distribute that to you all as soon as possible once we get further clearance. Just wanted to ask one more time, are there any questions or concerns from the advisory work group? Seeing and hearing none, again, we're looking to have the investment packages and scorecards to you by the end of this week. So please be on the lookout for that. And again, we will be contacting you shortly to schedule meetings with you all between now and the end of the month to discuss the packages as is. So if there are no other questions or concerns for the meeting, I'd like to thank you again for your time. Again, please feel free to contact me if you have any further questions about the LRTP or the process, and we'll be in touch with you soon. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Dorian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dorian.